Councilors, time having arrived, I'm hereby calling the Finance Committee meeting for June 7th, 2017 to order. Councilors, you know, tonight we're meeting as Finance for purposes of the city budget. Tomorrow night we'll be doing the same, 6:30. Friday we'll be doing the same Friday night, which is a rare move, but we know the importance of it. So we're meeting 6:30 Friday night as Finance Committee as well. Councilors, a couple pieces of information. We did just get, just when we walked in here, new revised budget books. Mr. Condon has explained to me that they're just insignificant changes. We can have him come forward to explain that as well. I know Councilor Rodriguez, Councilor Yaneri are going to be a little tardy tonight, but they will be joining us. I do also want to make it clear that we're very thankful that the BCA TV, Mark Landy and his group work collaboratively with Comcast and the IT for the city of Brockton. So we do have live cable, and it's also my understanding it's also streaming live, so there's two sources of live for the constituents that we serve. I think that's about it. The city clerk also, I just want to make it clear, everything was properly duly noticed for this meeting, and our city clerk actually went extra, and he put it out in the enterprise as well. So we've covered all bases on that, and I want to thank Mel and her staff for coordinating that. With that being said, if I could have, first of all, Mr. Condon come up just to please explain to the committee, Jay, about the new book.
Okay, well, we tried the best we could to get the budget books in your hands last Tuesday evening at the Finance Committee meeting. When we did that, when we put the budgets in your hands normally, I've done a balancing myself with my team of the forecaster, which is the computer model that takes the revenues and agrees with Munis, and the budget order to make sure it was all proper. There were a couple of budgets, the main one being planning, where there was money in the wrong place that I didn't pick up until after I started to create the budget order, and we'd already produced these books. So that's what caused it. Main issue was in planning and planning board, where there was money in the planning board budget that belonged in the planner's budget. It's now where it belongs. A couple of other ones where I would notice some math errors and some typographical errors, but that's the only one of any significance. Had we been doing the old books, 3-ring binders, I'd have simply given you 4 or 5 pages and said replace it. But to change these things is a royal pain, and because it's front and back printing, not just single pages, that caused a problem too. So apologize for it. That's basically what did it. We created them to give them to you tonight rather than to give you the loose leaf pages that would have probably taken you 10 or 15 minutes opening and closing the spiral binder up. So that's the reason for it.
So, Mr. Condon, in regards to tonight, planning board, that would have the new one, but like relative to the mayor's budget, we can rely on the old one?
Yes.
Okay,
I think that's,
and pretty much everything else would be relied on as well?
Yes.
Because I know, like, I highlighted the old one, I'm sure you all did as well, so we just want to make sure. So when we go to planning board and planner on tonight's agenda, we'll refer to the one that Mr. Condon gave us. Okay, councilors?
Yes, thank you.
With that being said, Madam Clerk, if we could go to agenda item number 1, please.
The mayor. Honorable
Good evening, Mr. Mayor.
Bill Carpenter, Mayor.
Good evening, Mr. President. Good evening, councilors. With your permission, Mr. President, I could give an opening statement and share with the council a general overview of the entire budget, and then certainly I will remain to field questions from the councilors specifically about the mayor's budget.
Please do. Thank you.
Fair enough? Okay. Good evening, councilors. Tonight I present to you a balanced city appropriated budget of a little more than $406 million for your consideration. We look forward to working with you over the next 3 nights as we review each city's department's budget with you. Any discussion of Brockton's FY18 budget must begin with the budget for the Brockton Public Schools. Due to a 3rd consecutive year of essentially level funding of Brockton's Chapter 70 local aid to education by the state, our schools face a $16 million deficit in order to provide a level services budget. While the state's contribution to education this year is only a minimal $300,000 increase on a $171 million allocation, it's important to note that the city has increased its allocation to net school spending by $2.6 million. The city has stepped up and done its share. Our total net school spending appropriation is $700,000 above the contribution required by the foundation budget. However, even though we are putting in more, the schools are receiving less. The single biggest hit we're taking on our state aid to education is the deduction for charter school tuitions. This year, that is a $12.2 million deduction right off the top from our Chapter 70 funding. Those dollars never make it to Brockton. That deduction is $5 million more than it was a year ago. There are other factors as well, including $6.6 million in pay raises to BEA members last year, a total of $8 million in raises amongst all school employees, counting all of the collective bargaining units. Those raises, combined with over $8 million in raises last year, are unsustainable while we are being level funded by the state. Using round numbers, over $16 million in pay increases over the past 2 years at a time that our Chapter 70 local aid, which represents about 80% of our school funding, has remained essentially level. A couple other factors to also be aware of. The city was able to control the increased cost of health insurance this year through successful negotiations with the PEC representing all of the city unions. Agreed plan changes will save the city about $2 million on our health insurance costs this year. So this year's health insurance costs only increase by about 2% instead of the anticipated 5 or 6% market-wide rate increases. We appreciate the union's cooperative approach to control costs, keeping in mind that these changes were agreed to in lieu of the city joining the GIC, which could have potentially saved the city even more money, but provided our employees inferior coverage. The concessions on health insurance were in no way related to the current budget deficit. That seems to be a little bit of a misconception right now, that the concessions on health insurance that were negotiated with all city unions, not just the schools, were in return for the city's commitment to not go to the GIC. Brockton remains one of only a handful of municipalities in the Commonwealth whose health insurance is not in the GIC. So we very much appreciate the cooperation. I think it has allowed us to realize substantial savings, a couple $1 million in this year's budget, but we should be well aware that those concessions in the health insurance by all of our unions, that was in return for us not going to the GIC. Those concessions were in no way related to the current school department budget deficit. Remember also that the city's contribution to school costs is more than just our net school spending allocation. In fact, in this year's FY18 budget, you will find about $14 million in additional school funding, including nearly $9 million for transportation and $3.7 million to Southeastern Regional School District. As a city, we are doing the best we can to fund our schools, plus more. Relief must come from the state, where we are not being fairly reimbursed for our special needs students, our low-income students, or our English language learners. In 2015, the legislature commissioned its own foundation budget review. The commission released its report in October of 2015 with a series of recommendations. Implementing any of these recommendations would mean more state education dollars coming to Brockton. However, to date, the state has not even adopted one of its own recommendations from that commission last year. At the request of the superintendent of schools and the Brockton School Committee, the city solicitor's budget for FY18 includes additional funding for outside counsel so that the city of Brockton may join several other gateway cities in pursuing an equity in education lawsuit against the Commonwealth. On the city side of the budget, we are facing substantial challenges as well. Councilors, you'll recall that back on September 7th of last year, I shared a correspondence with you from the city's CFO with regard to a nearly $5 million assessment from the Brockton Retirement Board for the city's pension costs. Last year, in FY17, the city paid $18.7 million into the pension fund. This year, the city's cost will exceed $23.3 million, a 25% increase of $4.7 million. That increase reflects higher projected retirement benefits due to salary increases over the past 6 years, coupled with investment returns on the fund that have been much lower than projected. This money is due and payable on July 1st. We have no option other than to pay it. And without an offsetting increase in revenue to cover this payment, I have no alternative than to recommend applying the full Prop 2.5 increase to the tax levy. In fact, with the dramatic increase in pension costs, a modest increase in health insurance, and an additional $700,000 in school funding above the required minimum, we face $7 million in increased expenses this year before even looking at the rest of the budget. Despite small annual increases in state unrestricted local aid, Brockton has never recouped approximately $8.5 million lost in local aid annually when the state discontinued 2 additional local aid programs back in 2007 and 2008. I am pleased to report to you this evening that despite the continuous underfunding of Brockton's local aid by the state and the dramatic increase in the cost of retirement benefits, we will be able to maintain essential city services without layoffs. Public safety remains our top priority. This budget allows us to maintain recent staffing levels on the Brockton Fire Department while continuing our gradual rebuilding of the Brockton Police Department. When our 12 newest police officers enter the academy in September, we will have 200 police officers, our highest staffing level since 1987. No one believes that laying off firefighters or police officers is a good idea. Councilors, I would also like to bring your attention to a couple of key line items in our water and sewer budgets. In the FY18 water budget, you will see that the City of Brockton will make $7.6 million in payments to Aquaria this year. All but $1 million of that $7.6 million paid to Aquaria is in fixed costs that we are contractually obligated to make even if we do not draw a single drop of water. However, it's clear that the days of not drawing any water from Aquaria are over. Under an administrative consent order with the state's Department of Environmental Protection, Brockton is required to develop a water management plan that will be subject to DEP approval. Based upon our ongoing conversations with DEP regulators, we know that DEP will require Brockton to draw additional water from Aquaria to lessen our impact on Silver Lake. It is likely that in future years, our annual payments to Aquaria will exceed $8 million per year. We look forward to your review in July of the proposed purchase of the Aquaria desal plant. While some have said that we cannot afford to buy the Aquaria plant, quite the opposite is true. We cannot afford not to buy it. And that is why the Brockton Water Commission has favorably recommended the Aquaria purchase by a unanimous 5-0 vote. Councilors, looking at the FY18 sewer budget, you will note that I have recommended moving $1 million of sewer revenues into sewer purchase of service. This is the initial step toward shutting down our aging sludge incinerator. As we anticipate air quality standards continuing to toughen, and we project that the incinerator will require additional capital investment, it is time to stop burning sewer sludge in Brockton. Shutting down the sludge incinerator will give us cleaner air to breathe and an improved quality of life for Brockton residents, particularly on the south side of the city. And finally, we continue to improve the city's financial health despite all of the fiscal challenges that we face. 3 years ago, when I submitted my first city budget, the stabilization or rainy day fund stood at $2.4 million. Today, we have about $5.4 million, but the FY18 budget in front of you that I submitted this evening adds an additional $1 million to stabilization, bringing the balance to $6.4 million, $4 million more than 3 years ago. This budget also increases the Chapter 324 reserve to almost $6.3 million, up from $5 million 3 years ago. So from the FY15 budget to tonight's FY18 budget, we've added about $5 million to our total reserves. And I'm pleased to announce to you tonight, as a clear indicator of our improving financial health, that Standard & Poor has removed the negative outlook from our bond rating and affirmed our AA rating. In addition, just this morning, S&P again reaffirmed its rating and stable outlook on the city's long-term bonds, and also issued its rating of SP1+ for short-term bonds the city will be selling this month to finance temporarily our LED streetlight program, our facilities master plan, and the conclusion of our school rehabilitation projects. I'll quote from you from this morning's S&P report, quote, "The short-term rating reflects our view that Brockton maintains a very strong capacity to pay principal and interest when notes come due." Thank you for your attention. I'll be happy to remain with you, Mr. President, to answer specifically questions on the mayor's budget.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councilors, just point of information, the mayor indicated that he welcomes the Finance Committee in July to hear the Aquaria proposal. It probably won't be in the month of July, as we want to hear the resolve from MWRA prior to that. It may be in later July, but I would say on our schedule it's probably going to be August, because myself and Mr. Farr will file the resolve that I want to hear, and I think this committee wants to hear before that. So just point of information on that. With that being said, the mayor's here relative to his specific budget on his department. Is there any speaking order? Does anybody want a question? Mr. Farwell first, followed by who? We'll go with Mr. Farwell first.
Actually, without objection, I'd like to ask Mr. Condon just an overview question of the city budget, if that's...
No, any objection on that? No objection. You're fine.
Mr. Condon, good evening. The one thing that obviously isn't in the budget is the strategy financially if we have to pay that judgment as a result of that court case. Right. Do you have a plan if that were to come due and the city had to pay $4.1 million? Do we know where that would come from, or how would we handle that at this point?
I think if we're unfortunate and we're not able to get a reversal of that or a reduction of that through the process of challenging it in the court system or through negotiation with the plaintiff, if that doesn't work out for us and the bill comes due, we would approach the legislature to allow us to borrow it over a period of time, as it has done for large judgments against communities in the past, so that we didn't have a single year's impact on the budget of $4 million.
Okay, and this is just a technical question. Within the budget document, there's a notation that there's an adjusted amount that was spent in FY17. And I think that may go back to a conversation you and I had many months ago, that within personal services, any department may move around, strike that, within ordinary maintenance, any department may move around monies to accomplish certain objectives. So if I look at the FY17 budget book and then I look at the FY18, it looks as though, for example, that a certain amount was set aside for one line item, but it's much larger now in the new document you've given us. So is it fair to say that money has been moved around within ordinary maintenance?
Yes, it is. That's correct. It's a combination of two things. If you remember the budget book that you receive in fiscal 17 at this time of the year, which reflects the mayor's recommendations and then whatever council adjustments are made when we finally publish it, is prior to setting the tax rate. After that, we can appropriate with council approval monies for different purposes, and that increases the spending. It usually comes from either cuts that the city council has made for one purpose, it gets reappropriated for another, or it could be, as usually happens, we've created a conservative estimate for taxation growth, and when the final growth number is coming in, we either put it in the reserves or we spend it for different purposes. So that's one source of it. In addition, even after we've set the tax rate, if there's a need for spending that the council approves, it could be from a transfer of one budget to another budget, or it could be from a transfer from one of the reserve funds into the budget. So if you look from fiscal 17 to fiscal 18, those differences aren't reconcilable by just inspection, but the cause of it is, as you've described, either the department head has moved money within the appropriation line items as he's allowed to do, or those other kind of supplemental appropriations have occurred.
All right, and I mention that so that, for the benefit of those watching this and any council, these are just guidelines, really.
Correct.
This is not a specific appropriation to a specific line item
Correct.
within a department budget, so there is quite a bit of
Correct, and
possible
the
flexibility.
format in the budget books is that the appropriation amount is in bold. That's a bold line. And then at the back of each department, there's a summary of those bold lines, which shows the specific appropriations. Those will track directly to the actual budget order, which in the new books you've got tonight is in those books, the actual budget order. And it will also track directly to what I call the forecaster, which is the computer model I use to develop all of these spending totals and reconcile them with revenue. So that level of appropriation is not within the department's authority to change. That requires a city council action. But the little line items inside that appropriation are within the department head's authority to change, because your appropriation is at the larger level, not at the detail level.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Counselor. Councilors, any other Mr. Constantine, any other questions for him? All right, we're going to go back to the mayor's budget. Any specific questions for Mayor Carpenter? Counselor Farwell.
Yeah. Good evening, Mr. Mayor.
Good evening, Counselor. I'm going to use my glasses for this one.
Let me start off by saying probably the least pleasurable thing we do as a mayor is put together a budget, because there's never enough money to do what you'd like to do. And the questions I'm going to ask you, I want to assure you personally, I would ask this of any mayor. This is not directed towards you. There are just some things that jumped out at me
Yep.
that I thought were interesting.
Well, we're here for 3 nights.
Well, it won't be that long. Your budget's not that large, so. From FY16 to FY18 requested budget, full-time salaries, line item 511100. In FY16, it was 494,144, and you're asking for 656,370, and that's about a 32% increase over the last 2 years, or a 19% increase over FY17. And given what you said about the schools, I think we're all sensitive about where money is allocated, so perhaps you could clarify where you think
Yeah, if I could
that
just get to
increase
the
is needed and what's
forecaster.
going to happen. And
So going back to, so Jay, need help. FY16, was that the year we had the raise? Let me just get on the same page as you, Counselor, so I can
Yes.
look at it with you.
Here's the number he's referring to.
I'm sorry, it would be under
That page, no.
Mayor's Personal Services, non-overtime. Forgive me for not
No, that's okay.
telling you that.
Right after the office structure.
Here should be the
Counselor Farwell, just for those watching, you said specific, a 32% increase, 19% increase.
There it is.
Just for hard dollars, it's about 100 grand from last year, about 160 grand from 2 years ago, relative to the request.
Yes, I think this year's request
for fiscal 17.
is about 105,000 over last year's
Thank you.
budget.
Thank you, Counselor.
Yeah. Yep, okay, yep. All right, very good. Counselor, I'm with you now.
Okay.
So we're looking at
Oh, yeah.
essentially full-time payroll in the mayor's office. So the 2016 actual expenditures, I'm not really working off that number. I'd work off the 2017 revised budget, because in that, we'd have to go back and see, I may have been budgeted for more than that amount, and we think we probably had some vacancies at some times during the year that would cause that number to be a little bit lower than what was actually budgeted. But I think for the purpose where you're really going with your question is the 2017 revised budget of 551 and the 656 this year. Directly attributable primarily to two factors. One, the citywide grants writer that we added last year. That was only budgeted for a portion of the year last year, a small portion of the year. It was only budgeted for a few months. It was not budgeted for the whole year. We knew that it was going to be at some point later in the year before we added that position. As you look at the budget, that's not a cheap position, but I tell you, I believe that as the council looks at that position over the next couple of years, we're going to reap rewards multiple times over the cost of that citywide grants writer, and I feel as though we had very widespread support on the council for finally creating that position. But certainly, it's open to your purview each year. That would represent most of the 80,000. There's also an increase for an additional constituent services person around language skills. So in the past, well, you don't have that. Let me go to the whole chart here. Yeah, right here. So if you were to look at name and title number 9, that was an addition from last year. So that job title is Assistant Director of Constituent and Language Services. We have made a small investment, Counselor, and I think this was just to expand what we've been doing since day one, and that is to make the City Hall experience and getting assistance from city government more accessible to all of our residents, and to provide everyone equal level of services. And clearly, one of our shortcomings when I came in 3 years ago was that we didn't really have the language skills in the building that aligned with the languages that were being spoken by many people coming into the building and or calling on the phone looking for services. So we, both in our hiring practices, as we work with department heads and they select new employees, I think that they are taking into consideration that if someone has the ability to speak a second or third language, that that's a positive. But also the fact that we have, from the mayor's office, have people that are constantly, every day, escorting constituents to various city departments to help them when the person's trying to assist them at that department does not speak the same language. So I think those two would account for pretty much all of what I'm sure there's a couple other minor differences, but I think those two would account for pretty much everything that you're highlighting.
Understood, and I think most of us share your philosophy about the grant writer. I think that will yield long-term benefits.
And I can see it already. We've had a couple grant applications going in. As you know from your experience, Counselor, these grant funding cycles tend to be like one-year cycles. You don't just snap your finger and get awarded a grant. A lot of work goes into, from the research to the preparing to the submission and then waiting for results. But as an example, we've been striving to try to get HUD grant money back into the city for lead paint abatement. That was money that we used to get. It was lost in the final year of the prior administration. We've made a couple runs at trying to get that money, those types of funds back into Brockton. We think it's essential for working class people to be able to live in multifamily homes and help us stabilize inner city neighborhoods with owner occupancy. Quite often the cost of lead paint abatement is what prevents that owner occupant from being able to buy that property. And so just recently we filed in the next funding cycle with HUD, and having reviewed the application that went in this year, you can see that it is a considerably stronger application this year because of the work of that citywide grant writer. There's never any sure thing in grants. The competition is fierce, particularly today. But I can tell you with confidence that our application this year is stronger than it was a year ago because of the efforts of that citywide grants writer.
All right, a couple of more questions, and this is really for clarification. Signing bonuses. I know it's fun to work in the mayor's office, but I didn't know we gave out a signing bonus, so.
Looks a little low to me.
Depending upon how it's split, I don't know. But that and the educational incentive, because my memory is you have.
Well, let me take them in opposite order, because the educational incentive one I know right off the top of my head. Okay. The citywide grants writer is a union position. And under the collective bargaining agreement, he's entitled to an ed incentive, which we did not previously have in the mayor's office, but because he has a master's in public administration, he's entitled to an ed incentive under his collective bargaining agreement. So that had to be added in.
Okay.
And that would be some of that additional money you were referring to also.
The signing bonuses for 2 positions that are union is in
Right, right, and exactly. The bonus money is also, we have 2 union employees in the mayor's office, the office manager and the grants writer, and they're entitled to these bonuses under their collective bargaining agreements.
Understood, understood. Going on to mayor's goods and supplies, line item 530100, human services. That, in FY17, you recommended $87,606. I believe that was included in the amount that the council approved, and now you have gone up to $120,215.
I'm sorry, which line again, Counselor? I'm sorry.
That is on the same page as the mayor's personal services overtime, but it's down under mayor's goods and supplies.
Oh,
and it's
human
the first
services.
one, 530100.
Well, again, that's actually level funded from last year's budget. It was, last year's budget was $122,15, and we requested level funding again this year.
All right, well, I have last year's budget,
85 was 16.
I have 87,606, mayor recommended, on FY17.
Okay, well, the revised number was the $122,15, that's what I'm looking at.
120 is 27.
Yeah, that's the revised budget, but that's my point, that it went up from what was presented to us in the budget book to you spending about $120,215, which is another $32,000 over what was presented to us in last year's budget book. So what is that line item, and do you have any idea why that seems to be going up?
I'll have to go back and review the expenses, Counselor.
That's fine.
Off the top of my head, I don't know, but I'll be happy to follow up with you on that.
All right, and the last thing is registration and memberships. Last year, it was $24,000 presented to us in the budget book, and now it's $35,325. And I know Mass Municipal charges more. I think U.S. Conference of Mayors is a
Right.
very valuable
So the
organization.
two big ticket items in there are U.S. Conference of Mayors and Mass Municipal Association. They eat up almost that entire line. As you know from your times, they're both extremely valuable to the mayor in terms of professional development, resources, managing the city. Mass mayors meet monthly. We derive a lot of great information from that. U.S. Conference of Mayors is certainly used by big and small city mayors across the country. That's the vast majority of that. I think also, let me just look at that line with you for 1 second, Counselor.
I'm sure that's what it is. And that's when I read it, I thought...
What's that line number again, Counselor?
It's under Mayor's Goods and Supplies. It's 573100.
Yep.
And I kind of assumed
Yeah.
that's what it would be.
And again, the increase you're referring to is going back to 2 budgets ago in FY16. We've requested level funding from what was the revised amount last year.
Okay,
I think a pretty educated guess for a few thousand is probably, they both increase their dues each year.
oh, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the last item that,
And actually, the Mass Municipal is the more expensive of the 2, believe it or not, but,
well, they all love their membership dues, so.
yeah, but I do feel that we get a lot of support from them and a lot of services that we do take advantage of.
All right, the last question is always the one that, every office I've held, it's out-of-state travel. We separately appropriated $5,000 last year for out-of-state travel, and in our budget book this year, there is a revised total of $85.40.
Right, because actually expended, it was encumbered in June. I think I had some travel right at the end of the fiscal year, so we encumbered it but paid it in the next year.
So it's
But
a kind of it's a carryover then?
It was a carryover from the prior year, but I have never spent in excess of $5,000 in 1 year, and in fact, if you were to add up my totals for my time as mayor, I have not fully utilized that budget.
That's what I thought, and so it was odd when you were asking
Yeah.
for about 8,500 this year, that's all.
I'll take $5,000.
All right,
I've never
thank you.
spent over 5,000 in a year. I believe that adjustment was, we'd encumbered some money right at the end of the prior year. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's fine.
I requested 5. We essentially were looking to level fund most line items, as you'll see throughout most departments in the budget. There's been a 5,000 out-of-state travel line item going back for at least 3 previous mayors. So it's never been increased. I'm perfectly happy to live within that budget. And again, if you were to add up my total expenditures through my years as mayor, I have not fully spent that line item.
Well, the last comment I have, and I'm not being gratuitous in any way, I will say that of all the people I deal with, your staff is always professional, always courteous. I think you've put together a good team, and I might humorously say that sometimes they're more likable than you are.
Harkens back to the Farwell administration, huh?
Thank you very much.
Yeah, Counsel, if I could, because you brought it back up, I really believe, and I know it is costing us a little more money, that Assistant Director of Constituent Services and Language Services, she is outstanding. She's worth double or triple what we're paying her. We get constant positive feedback on her efforts, and a lot more people are having positive experiences with city government, whether it's on the phone or in person, because of that person's efforts. So I would just personally advocate that the council would see its way clear to continue to fund that position.
Well, again, I sincerely thank you for the information, and thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Counselor. Counselor Barnes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Mayor, thank you for being here.
Whoops, I closed my book.
I
Go ahead.
actually had one question. Councilor
Okay.
Fowler actually addressed some of the things that I also caught. Just one thing, are we?
Go ahead. No, that's all right. Go
Okay.
ahead.
So under mayor purchase of services, the tourism, I know that at one time, I think this was before Councilor Beauregard was elected, she was trying to get a tourism unit or department or something going here and highlighting, the gems that we have in Brockton and trying to entice visitors and folks to, not drive by, but to stop into Brockton. So I guess I'm in looking at,
Yeah, so I think, Counsel, if I can help a little bit,
I just want to know why it's reduced, because at one time it was up to almost 80, it was up to 80-something $1,000, if I'm looking correctly, at 2017, and now it's down to 52.
I think although it does show...
And I want to know what it is. What
The
is it?
actual, again, you're looking at actual in 2016. Again, I don't know if there was some money encumbered from the previous year, but we have typically requested $50,000 for that line item. And again, that level of funding was in place before I became the mayor. That's a long-standing account. We use it for tourism and promotion. So it's not strictly tourism, it's also business promotion, promoting the city, improving the image and the perception of the city, takes a number of forms. We typically partner with the Metro South Chamber of Commerce on a couple projects each year. That's how we pay for our share of those projects out of that line item. But typically, I believe $50,000 is what's usually been requested on that line item.
Okay, so, so the 220-something thousand to B21, that advertising and promotion, it doesn't cover that? Or that's not in that?
No, the B21 can explain their own budget, but it's 120, is it 100,000 to the stadium and 125 to the, right.
Yeah, no, I see.
Right, so out of that
Marketing.
225 line item, and again,
Marketing?
Council, on the B21 line item, I'm requesting just level funding from last year.
I see.
Last year was down 25,000 from the prior year. We used to fund that at 250. It was cut a couple years ago. That is primarily pays for money towards the stadium that they're
Right.
in charge of maintaining. That's 100,000 of it. And the other 125 is primarily the office expense of running it, the salary of the executive director with some basic clerical support.
I guess I didn't ask that right.
Okay.
it came out kind of when you said that you partner with the Metro South Chamber of Commerce and all of those kinds of
We
things.
partner with B21 on plenty of things.
That's what I'm
too.
asking, so-
I'm sure you can give you a whole list of
Okay.
things that we've worked together on. Yeah,
Excuse me.
The B21 is a very important part of our overall economic development team. So we've got, the BRA, the B21, the Metro South Chamber, obviously city government, Rob May in the Planning and Economic Development Office. They're all important members of the team. B21's a member of the team.
No, I understand. I just wanted to, since you said that the tourism was tourism and
No, I was
advertising and marketing.
just trying to give you an example of a couple of the expenditures I remembered off the top of my head.
Right, okay. I just want to make sure
Yep.
that everybody's working in concert, but,
Yep.
thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank
And
you,
that's
Chairman.
a funding level that's been in place for years.
Right, no, I wasn't questioning the funding level. I guess
Okay.
it was more procedural.
Yep.
But, okay,
Fair
thank
enough.
you.
Thank you,
Fair
Counsel.
enough.
Counsel Cruz.
Thank you. Evening, Mr. Mayor.
I got to stop closing this book.
Well, actually, you don't even need to open it for me. I think you can answer. So cable access, there's $675,000, and that's basically what we allow you to spend towards most of it. I know goes to BCA, some goes towards the high school. I'm going to ask you, and I know that the fund has more money than that in it.
Right. So this came out from Council Rodriguez a couple years ago in the budget hearing, brought to our attention an MOU that I was previously unaware of during my first year as mayor, that essentially the MOU between the city and the BCA spells out exactly how the revenues are distributed. So 75% goes directly to BCA for operating budget.
Correct.
Not capital, but operating budget. Some minor stuff, but primarily operating budget. That amount had been a little bit lower when that MOU came to light a couple years ago. We went back and recalculated it at the formula, and the revenues have not been fluctuating a lot. That should still be a real good number. The other 25% goes into a cable account that's within the mayor's office, and it's used primarily for capital expenses. BCA, the high school, and Massasoit Community College all have the ability to make capital requests. I can safely say that during my 3+ years as mayor, I have approved all the capital requests that I've received from all three, although Massasoit hasn't asked us for anything lately. I do know...
Money when they build their nursing school, so.
Yeah. Well, it's going to have to somehow involve TV. I know that we're looking for upgrades here in City Hall, and I've made it clear to the director that I will look favorably upon those requests.
That's actually all I was bringing up.
When they're
is-
brought forward. There is money available, and I have no qualms about allocating it. I am a pretty regular member of your weekly telecasts. I'd like to see the quality improve and the services improve.
That's exactly what, that's
So-
all I wanted to bring up, is
Yep.
that we'll need
No,
to talk to Mr.
I
Dunleavy
support that
request
fully, and whatever, the only caveat I always put on it with everybody is make sure the procurement's done properly.
Correct, but it's amazing to me how many people do watch us.
Yeah, it's probably one of the biggest lessons I learned during my first year as mayor. I had never completely appreciated how many people follow city government on local cable access programming. And there's also some other great programming on, both channels 9 and 12 and 98.
So I just wanted to get your commitment on that.
And we are, as a
Appreciate it.
point of information, because I've been asked, I haven't seen it yet, but we are anticipating a request from the high school for an appropriation regarding the lighting and sound systems in the Fine Arts Theater. That we will get some documentation. I'll submit it to the solicitor for approval to make sure. But we believe that with all of the various programming that's recorded in that theater and broadcast on BCA over the course of the year, that could be a suitable investment for some of our cable funds, capital cable funds.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Counsel. Counsel Rodriguez.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good evening, Mr. Mayor.
Good evening, Counselor.
My question is not something specific to your budget, but just an overall something that I observed in the budget. And being involved in the past with city government in the sense, a lot of times the department will make a request for its budget, and then the mayor usually, at least when the 4 years that I spent in city government, the mayor usually grabs his pen and pencil or whatever and usually slashes the request, but never really increasing anything. But yet, in your budget, I see in several areas where the department asked for, just to give you an example, the Board of Health, they asked for $844,000, and you recommended $911,000. There are some in here, for instance, in the sewer budget line, they requested 11 million point six something something, and you recommended 22 million.
Well, for specifically the Board of Health, first of all, to answer your general question, there's a lot of verbal beating up of department heads before they actually submit their stuff to me. So just because that's the number they put in doesn't mean that there wasn't a lot of, or at least some, back and forth discussions before they actually made their request. In the case of the Board of Health, and you'll have Lou here to go over his budget with you, but he brought forward to me a couple specific requests after. Remember, they submit these to me pretty early. I want to say February, Jay, or? Yeah. Those requests come to me pretty early in February. And so sometimes between February and May, the department head may come to me with some additional need that seems valid to me, and so I can adjust for that in the budget to cover it. And Lou did have a couple of specific requests around staffing that he felt was critically necessary, and he convinced me to allow the higher amount.
But as you can tell, aesthetically, it doesn't really look all that well, because if I'm a department head and I'm saying I need $250,000 to run my department, but yet the mayor is recommending $500,000.
Right.
Somebody might say, why is it that
So I
the
think,
department...
I get what you're saying.
Help me understand that, because if this is something that I'm questioning, I'm sure anybody that grabs the budget book after the fact is going to look at some of these numbers and realize that, you know, there's some lower requests by the department and a higher recommendation from the mayor. So that's why I'm asking you that question.
So I think a couple things to consider, Counselor. First of all, I am engaged with those department heads on almost a daily basis. I meet with the large department heads almost every day. I meet with all department heads at least once a week. So I, from very early on, was leaning on those department heads very hard this year, knowing the tough budget that we were up against, and I cautioned them over and over, and in some cases, I did specifically ask them to lower their request. So there is quite a bit of downward pressure. I mean, I could fix your concern by just telling everyone to ask me for 20% more than they really need, and then I could chop them all down, and it would look great on paper, and it would be meaningless. So I think that the answer is that in every instance, every request is individually considered. I'm not an easy sale. We are under tremendous financial pressure with the city. We need to justify every dollar we spend. I think that our track record over the last 3 years shows that, and I can assure you that I'm not offering any department heads some extra money that they don't need. It's quite the opposite. I am constantly imploring them to get by with less.
Perhaps you covered this, and I was a little late coming in because I went to a retirement event in the sewer.
Right, so you did miss it. So in my opening statement, I drew attention to the fact, to the councilors, that I am recommending that we move $1 million of revenues into sewer purchase of services. And Councilor, that will be for the purpose of shutting down the incinerator. We believe that air quality standards are going to continue to toughen. As I continue to be updated on the incinerator is aging and is going to require some substantial investment in the near future in order to keep us in compliance. I don't think that's a good investment. I think it's time for us to stop burning sludge, and the $1 million has actually been worked on, we anticipate an increase in costs of about $1.5 million in having to truck out all of the sludge, but we also anticipate about a $500,000 savings by shutting the incinerator down. So there's going to be a net cost of about $1 million a year, and after careful review, the sewer budget can handle it, and we think it's the time to do it. We think that's what's in the best interest of the public. The time has come. It's time to shut the incinerator down.
But, Mr. Mayor, within the sewer budget, again, the department requested $11 million.
Yeah. Right.
And
Right.
what you recommended was 22 million, so I'm just
Right.
trying to figure out where's the
Yeah.
11 million?
So
going?
with all due respect, we've got a format here where we're going to have every single department head come up here with everyone there, and the department head with the full support team will be happy to go through that budget with you
No, but
line by
The
line.
reason why I'm asking, and again, with all due respect, is that because I went through this book, and I looked at some of these numbers, and what I'm looking at is what the department requested versus what the mayor recommended.
So as you know, the sewer
And you
account
was
is
the
an
mayor, so that's why I'm
the sewer
asking you.
account is an enterprise account, so the money that's in the sewer account can only be spent on sewer.
Right.
There's no opportunity to move that money anywhere else. I will defer until the DPW commissioner is up here, and we'll be happy to go through that budget with you line item by line item.
No, but what I'm saying is that
I understand the
they
question,
asked
Counselor. I
11
think
million,
it's out of
and you-
line right
Council,
now.
Mr. Mayor, I believe Mr. Condon said he could answer that. He just motioned,
Well, then
if you could come forward,
okay.
Mr. Condon.
I think I can stop
Thank you, Mr.
this
Carter.
back and forth a little bit. On the enterprise fund budgets, there are a couple of accounts that they don't do the budget for. They pay debt service, but the treasurer's office calculates the amount due on the debt service. So that shows a zero on the request, but the mayor's budget includes the debt service. Then the enterprise accounts reimburse the general fund for costs that are in our budgets here, but they've got to repay. They don't know what those costs are. My office calculates those reimbursements. So most of the difference you're looking at there is in the sewer budget is attributable to debt service costs and that enterprise fund reimbursement. With respect to the other cost, there are a lot of contract settlements that came in, and they were coming in at the time that the departments were preparing their budgets. We told them, don't try to calculate your contractual increase on your salaries. My office will take care of it, and we'll add it at the mayor's budget level. So most, for example, on the health budget that you were referencing before, that was an account where we had a late settlement with the Brockton Engineering Union, BCE it was called. And all of those costs had to be added after the department head had submitted his budget. So that's the basic area, and you'll see it in this budget throughout. The contract settlements that came in late, the impact of those were added by my office, and it shows as the mayor's addition.
And what, Mr. Condon, what prevents, for instance, you from adjusting these numbers prior to submitting these books to avoid some of these so-called misunderstandings and not actually seeing this?
Well, because, you mean,
Okay, let's forget about the sewer for now, that's 11 million, and you just explained what it was, but
because
there's
I want to
some,
have a track which goes back to what did the department himself actually submit, as opposed to adjusting what they submitted. We want to have a record which, at that level, and it also has to do with how Munis works. We keep that level fixed, it can't be changed, that first level, and then it's successively rolled up. That's how the budgeting process works in Munis, and we want to have a record of what the original request from the department head was. Most of the departments, on most of their cost, request all of the cost. Sometimes it comes in later. In a couple of key budgets, like the sewer budget, as I said, the water budget, where they've got debt service in their budget, they don't do any of that. They don't have that information. It comes out of the treasurer's office.
yeah, because what ends up happening is that in a tough budget season, when things are tight and everybody's looking for, to tighten the belt here and there, when you see some discrepancies, from a request to a recommendation, it might lead to questions to say, well, perhaps that's an area where we might be able to cut
Right,
and
if
basically
you look
transfer some of those
carefully
funds
at
around, that's why I'm
What you're
saying.
talking about there, you'd see, well, can we cut debt service from 3.6 million in sewer to zero? And the answer to that is no, that's needed. And if you
No, I'm not talking about that one, I'm talking about some of the other ones that are, $20,000, $200,000, $120,000 difference from the request versus the
And as I-
recommend.
Most of those were in the personal services areas for contractual costs. Some of the others, off the top of my head, I don't remember. I know that's general throughout the budget, and when we get to the specific budgets, we can probably answer those questions
Okay.
as they come up.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Counselor. Any other questions? The Chair has a question, actually, maybe Mr. or maybe I could ask the Mayor. Relative to the question that Counsel Fowle asked about out-of-state travel, and you said there was an encumbrance on that. 12 years on the City Council, I have never heard a department head say there's an encumbrance on something, so, and then the Mayor said it could be cut to $5,000. So I guess my question is, on how many line items is there an encumbrance on, number one? And number two, how often are you able to carry it to the fiscal year, the prior fiscal year going forward?
Then we're not asking the accounting department that, I think, but I think
Yeah.
encumbrances can be made up until June 30 or even a little bit after if they haven't closed the books. But if it's a prior year expense, it probably ought to be reflected.
Previous year. I guess what I'm confused about, Mr. Mayor, is you said you can live with the $5,000.
Absolutely.
For this fiscal year, 18. But
Right.
if there was an encumbrance after July 1, okay, came into this fiscal year from last year, how can you manage with $5,000 going forward this year if you have an expense that's outstanding for the previous
Yeah,
year?
no, I think that was specific to that one year that the counselor asked me about in the book. I'm answering it off the top of my head, but I recall having some travel late in the fiscal year, and by the time it got submitted, it hadn't been paid, it just had to be encumbered and then paid
But I'm
in
talking
July.
about this year, the $8,500.
Right. So I think that Mr. Condon answered that. My request was only $5,000. The financial officer's office level funded it from the prior year. The request is only $5,000. It's an easy cut for you. It's $5,000 is all. I think last year at some point, I gave the council a very detailed accounting of all my travel since the time I've been mayor. I think in only one of the three previous years did I come close to using the full $5,000. I certainly attend a couple conferences every year,
No,
make
I'm
a
not
trip to
concerned
DC.
about the $5,000.
Yeah.
It's a blip on a $400 million budget.
Right.
But I had never heard 12 years on the council that during the budget season, the encumbrance, and I think that's something that I want to get clarified. Maybe it's
I
the
don't think
accounting.
I don't think it's correct. I think the mayor may be mistaken on
Okay.
that. I'm trying not to be too direct on that, Counselor. But basically, if there's an encumbrance of monies that are outstanding before the close of the year or within a day or two after, before we've, shut down the books, that encumbrance can be paid subsequent to the end of the fiscal year, but the accounting for it ought to be in the fiscal year that just closed.
Previous year.
Yeah, I think this was a case where the money needed to be moved into fiscal 16 to pay all of that amount of money. It may have been a blip in terms of the amount of need for that year, but I think it was actually fiscal 16 expenses. And the mayor's recollection is it came late. I think that's what he's trying to say.
So your recommendation is to ask the auditor's office relative to any other departments that
I
may have
think
done that?
they could check to see on
Yeah,
that.
I just
but
would like to know
I think munis ought not to be allowing a prior year expenditure to
go
be
forward.
accounted for.
Yeah,
It's an account payable when it's encumbered, but it's an account payable to the prior year.
right.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions for the mayor? None? We're going to move on to the next agenda. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, councilors.
Madam Clerk, if we could go to number 2, please.
Planning Board, David Wheeler, Chairman.
Mr. Wheeler's not here. I believe Mr. May's here on his behalf.
Good evening, sir. Yes, I am playing the part of David Wheeler this evening.
Is there-
We've had a very busy season in the planning department. As many of you
Councilors,
attend.
bear in mind, again, I'm sorry, Mr. May, bear in mind, for those that might have come in late, the new book that was left in front of you is correct relative to the planning board and the planning department. So, Mr. Rodriguez and Mr. Ianeri, refer to this for this agenda item. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. May.
Thank you, sir. We've had a very busy season in the on the planning board. As you know, several of you attend planning board meetings on a regular basis, following specific projects, advocating for your constituents, and we appreciate that, and we continue to strive to make this information available to the public online. If you go to our webpage, you'll find planning board materials, and all the cases are listed by date, so that's something new that we've been doing since I've gotten here. But I just want to say we're pretty much looking at a level funding from last year, and I'm willing to take any questions that you may have.
Any questions for Mr. May relative to this? The chair has a question. Relative to the
Yes, sir.
planning board meetings, and I sat for 3 years on the planning board, we used to tape the meetings. Is that continuing? Because I was told that it discontinued. Is it going to be reactivated, or is there a reason why it's not being digitally recorded?
I do not
purposes
know,
of-
I apologize, I didn't know that they had been taped in the past. I mean, that's new information to me. I will have to also ask.
Dean, isn't that correct?
The clerk of the board.
Okay, if we could check on that. Counselor Ianieri served on the planning board as well, so if we could just check on that, I think it's
Sure.
important for transparency.
Yep,
Okay.
not a problem.
Any other questions? Counselor Rodriguez?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. May,
Yes, sir.
a quick question for you, and this is something that's happened often whenever we have an item that comes up that is of public interest. The meetings that you hold in the JR room, sometimes people are spilling out into the hallways. Are there any plans to move those meetings perhaps from the JR room into this chamber so that the folks can actually, one, participate, and two, perhaps going back to the videotaping or basically transmitting the images out of this chamber into the community? Are there any plans to do that?
We have asked to be able to use this room. We have been told that it is off limits to us.
Really? All right. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
As a follow-up, have you sought any other venues? I know ZBA is using the little theater at the Arnone School, which is an ample seating. Have you looked at other venues?
If there's something very controversial or something large going to be on there, we do tend to seek other venues. We have a couple of meetings that we're going to relocate because of the elevator construction sometime this summer. We'll be over at the Little Theater, and periodically we also meet at West Junior High.
Humble suggestion, I think August will be a pretty well-attended meeting, so we might want to contemplate that. Any other questions for Mr. May relative to this? Thank you, Mr. May.
Thank you, sir.
Madam Clerk, if we could go on to number 3, please.
Conservation Commission, David Zaff, Chairman.
Hi, I'm David Zaff. I'm Bob May for David Zaff. The Conservation Commission, as you know, is responsible for enforcing and monitoring the state's wetlands ordinance. We review a lot of projects over the years. We also work with applicants prior to coming to the commission to make sure that we get the best possible project working with them. And again, we're looking at a level funding for this year.
Any questions for Mr. May? Chair has a question relative to the conservation agent. What's the status update on the city having an in-house conservation agent?
Now that the contracts, the labor contract has been resolved and approved by City Council, we'll now be able to work with personnel to advertise that position. So we hope to have something in the near future. I know the Human Resources Department is working on a couple of big studies right now, but we hope to be able to get that out in the very near future.
And is it your expectation that it would be dedicated to the city of Brockton or would be shared? Other cities in town share an agent?
It would be dedicated to the City of Brockton.
Okay, thank you, Mr. May. Any other questions for Mr. May on this? Seeing none, we'll move on. Thank you, Mr. May. Going to go on to Traffic Commission? Oh, I'm sorry, Madam Clerk, number 4, please.
I'm sorry. No, I'm just curious.
Oh, do you have a question relative to the,
Yes.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
We'll hold that, Madam Clerk. Thank you.
I'm just curious, both of your boards, you're representing them. Where are your chairs? Just curious.
Well, our Planning Board Chair had a meeting last week, and yesterday, as a matter of fact, and Conservation the week after that, and we're asking them to do a lot on a volunteer basis, and I volunteered to represent them at these meetings.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Well, with that being said, Counselor, if you're chair of the commission, they only have to come here one time for the budget.
Oh.
And I know in the past, when the superintendent, Mr. Lopes, wanted to not come here,
Yeah.
tonight he couldn't be here, and he's not on the agenda because there's a graduation, but they've made accommodations to join us for that one night out of 365 days. So if you could please share that with the chairs, we would appreciate that as a finance committee and a city council. Thank you. Going to go on to number 4, please.
Traffic Commission, Captain Robert DeBarry.
Just kidding.
Captain, good evening.
Good evening.
Thanks for joining us. Any statement, or do you want to just take questions?
Just take questions.
Any questions for Captain DeBarry? Councilor Barnes.
I did. Hi, Captain, how are you? Just going through the budget and the difference is about a $20,000 increase, or so from last year, and I see that there's an additional, the additional line item is for guardrails.
Correct.
Can you just kind of explain, what is, how is that playing into,
We've been inundated with requests for guardrails
Oh.
to protect houses from being hit. So each traffic commission meeting we have, seems like almost on a monthly basis, we're getting requests
oh, okay,
for
okay.
guardrails.
Okay, I saw that, I was wondering how that was going to be implemented, but okay, thank you very much. Thank you,
Thank
sir.
you, Councilor. Councilor Lally.
Yeah, just to add on, just to sort of answer Councilor Barnes's question. I've personally been before the Traffic Commission several times about several different guardrails.
Okay.
And it's a, even when the Traffic Commission finds that something needs to be done, the money isn't always there.
Sure.
Guardrails they were about $100 a foot?
Roughly
Is that it?
$100 a foot.
About $100 a foot. So that money they didn't really have, the DPW didn't really have. So this makes sure that they're able to address things that they find are a safety concern.
Right.
They're able to be addressed immediately.
Super, that's great.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Councilor.
Thank you, Councilor.
Councilor Staninsky, followed by Councilor Yanieri.
Yeah. I have a question about following. Person sees different items happening, speeding, dangerous driving. Should they call the traffic commission? Or should they call the cops whose job it is?
They should call the non-emergency police line.
Thank you very much, Cap.
What was it, Councilor?
You call the
Thank you.
cops.
Very important. Thank you.
Important
Thank you.
message for the
It is.
constituents.
Thank you. Councilor Yanieri.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good evening, Captain. How are you?
Good, how are you?
Councilors, the one thing I'm going to indicate to you, and having served on the Traffic Commission, I know some of the others have served on it as well, but I think this is probably one of the only department that doesn't have enough funds to operate with. And there is before us at the Public Safety Subcommittee of the City Council a discussion in regards to what we can do to try to help in some way to hopefully alleviate some of our traffic concerns and problems that we have within the city. We had a great meeting just last week ago, and the captain was there, and we were talking about what we can do, what we can't do, what we think we want to do. Don't call me crazy. Anyhow,
Can you get up and show us your moves?
I wish I could. I did years ago. But in any case, when we were at that meeting, one of the biggest concerns that we had was the control of traffic in itself. And, one thing that the Traffic Commission does not have is enough people out doing traffic control, be it all day long, even through some of the hours of the evening. And when the captain was present, he was talking about just that particular item of how we'd like to see some more people, officers naturally, men, women, working within his department to try to alleviate some of those problems. So, as I've always said, and even councils before me have said, this is one budget that sometimes we don't pay enough attention to. I know when I was there just a couple of years ago, I'd come back and ask the mayor to fund it a little bit because we were looking for money just for signs that we needed, street signs. I mean, it's all costly factor, guardrails. At one point, we didn't even have enough money to do guardrails, and now we're coming back, and putting some money in that area. So I just want you to keep in mind that, as the time goes on, the future years, I think it's time that we also start to even think about looking at, not so much a traffic commission as we need a traffic division, because I think it's time that the city move forward in that direction, and hopefully we meet again, the chief will be able to join us so we can go even a little bit further. But I just want to make that in a comment, because Captain DeBarry and his staff and Mary, who took Patty's place, they're working together daily, and, Patty, she takes all our calls and all our concerns, and when I want a one-way sign, I want a no parking sign, I want a new street sign. These are the things that, that has to go through this office, and I just want everybody to realize that they're doing an yeoman's job, and so aren't the two traffic people we have, but we do need more people. So keep that in mind as we prepare budgets for the next year or two. Appreciate it, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Counselor.
Thank you, Captain.
I do want to recognize Mary Milligan, who does yeoman's work for that. Thank you for being here. And I don't have a question for you, Captain. I just have a concept, Counselor, that we might want to consider. I know recently we enacted where a traffic commission has to deal with waivers relative to sidewalks. I myself think that's ludicrous, that the traffic commission has to deal with that, and I've gotten a lot of complaints from attorneys, developers, and the like. So I think we might want to, as a collective body, consider that. I don't think it's at the appropriate commission relative to that. I'm only one of 11, but I think we need to look at that. And I want to congratulate your son, baseball player. Even though he's not in Brockton, he's going to Keene State on a scholarship, so congratulations.
Thank you.
Have a good night, Captain.
Thank you.
We're going to go on to Council, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead, Madam Clerk, number 5, please.
Council on Aging, Janice Fitzgerald, Director.
Good evening, Ms. Fitzgerald. How are
Good
you?
evening, everybody.
You have a statement, or?
Yep, just a brief one.
Yep.
So this year, the COA had a great year. We welcomed over 175 new members. Our elder population is continuing to increase. And I have to say a big thank you to my staff and volunteers who go above and beyond each and every day to serve the needs and demands of our elder population. And our building committee is still focused on raising the funds for the expansion. My budget is level funded, and I'll be happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Mrs. Fitzgerald. Questions for Janice? Councilor Barnes, followed by Councilor Farwell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Hello, Ms. Fitzgerald.
Yeah, Counselor.
So last year, I know that Councilor Rodriguez, and he can probably correct me or edit me if I'm incorrect, there was some discussion about adding some staff or adding people to your roster. And I think at the time you'd asked for $18,000 or something for a part-time person, and then through discussion, an additional, I think 18,000 or something was added to have at least a full-time person. Is that reflected in this budget, and were you able to fulfill that need, and is that what we're seeing here?
Yep, that's what you're seeing there, and that's exactly how it happened.
Okay.
So I do have a full-time position filled, thank you.
Okay, I just want to make sure that was actually implemented for your service, but thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Councilor.
Mr.
Councilor Farwell.
Yep, just not a question, just a statement. It's always a pleasure to go down to the center, and I still have very high hopes that we're going to one day move you to a new venue. I hope it's the Shaw's Center. I hope that some epiphany will come over the mayor, and he'll realize how wonderful it would be to cut the ribbon as we walk into that facility and you have expanded services. And I know a number of us are still pushing in that direction, so don't give up hope.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor. Any other questions? Mrs. Fitzgerald, thank you for what you do for the seniors in the city of Brockton.
Thank you.
Good night. Thank you. Madam Clerk, if we could go on to the next agenda item, please.
Veteran Services, David Farrell, Director.
Good evening, Mr. Farrell. How are you?
Good evening, Mr. President.
David, before
Very good.
we start, on behalf of the council, we want to thank you for what you do for the veterans. The parade just last week was unbelievable. And on a day-to-day basis, I know last year, a lot of the councilors were talking to you about putting monuments up and signage around the city for deceased veterans, heroes, and you did that, and I want to just commend for what you do. Any statement, or are you going to take questions?
No statement other than thanks to your support and our, location now is, we're at the War Memorial Building. I just want to say that it's just a wonderful place to work, and Veteran Services really fits well there, and the city's done a wonderful job. Public Properties and everyone in the building department have supported our location there, keeping the building in impeccable condition. You notice the grounds, the grass is always well kept, and of course we have a sprinkler system which helps keep it green all the time, and the mulching. It's just a beautiful building, beautiful location. Thank you for allowing us to be in that building.
Thank you, Mr. Farrell. Any questions? Councilor Barnes?
Thank you, Mr. Farrell. I just have a question. So last year, it was either last year or maybe a year and a half ago, there was a person that was, I guess, identified to be some sort of veterans outreach or something of that nature. And as I looked at your structure, your personnel structure, I didn't see that particular person's name, and I didn't actually, immediately recognize any of these positions as like that outreach. That's how it was kind of, advertised or sold to us. It was an outreach. So is that person still there, number one, or was that like a VA hospital liaison thingy?
He is still on the staff in kind of a quasi veterans office manner. He works for the VA. The position is funded through my department, but he's a outreach worker for the Veterans Administration at the Brockton campus.
Okay, so now, and correct me if I'm wrong, so last year, I think that was part of the controversy is how that person was going to be compensated, and I think there was some question on whether it was going to be coming out of your particular budget or out of the mayor's budget of some kind, but how does that fit in here if he's not listed?
He's, well, as I say, he's not a city employee. He's a CWT employee.
You just said that he gets paid out of your budget.
Yes, that's correct.
So how is he not?
It's an agreement and a contract between the VA and the city of Brockton through the mayor's office.
So
Actually, my office, I'm sorry, I signed the contract, excuse me.
Okay, so the city of Brockton pays a VA employee?
Yes, I would say that's, the shorthand of it, yes.
Is that legal?
Well, he's not a full-time employee of the VA. He's as I say, an outreach worker. It's a position that allows him to do what they call peer-to-peer counseling with veterans who are suffering from substance abuse or psychological issues and have difficulty integrating into the community. So they're usually pretty closely associated with VA institutional living.
So could you do more in your service, with your department for the veterans if he were being paid from the agency that he actually works for?
Well, I don't know. I know they do have people up there who also do that work. It's a kind of a carve-out that the VA allows individuals to represent, the communities they live in, and
I understand that. I guess I'm just having a problem with us paying for him. And I don't have a problem with what he's doing, because I know several people that have actually benefited from, engaging with him. But hearing that we're kind of paying for a VA employee, that doesn't gel with me, I guess, at this, and I don't really know how to address it. That could be funding that you could use.
Mr. Chairman, I believe it's a contracted service.
Yes.
It's not he's not paid as a city employee. I think just a little bit of miscommunication between you two. I believe it's a contracted service. He's paid by the VA but reports for work at Mr. Farrell's office.
No, that's not what he said.
I think there's a bit of I believe it's a contract, isn't it, David?
Well, there's contract services, but it is a line item on our budget under other services. You'll note that 16's actual expenditures were $3571, and they were revised up to $29,250 to cover the cost of this service.
So that's him?
Yes. That service is funded through that line.
Other purchases and services, so we're paying a VA employee out of city funds?
That's correct.
Okay, that's exactly what, as I understood that.
Counsel, it sounds to me that it's a proportional share, the city side to the VA, but you could, in your capacity as a counselor, request to see the contract. They could redact anything that's privy, but you could see the verbiage and the relationship.
Okay.
I don't think Mr. Farrell is prepared to talk about a specific contract tonight, nor do I think he should about a specific person, even though he's not an employee. But by all means, between now and before the budget is voted on, you could get that at your purview and review it.
Excellent. Okay, thank you. And we'll talk later. Thank you, Mr. Farrell. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Bonds. Councilor Bonds, sorry. Definitely not a guy. Any other questions by anybody for Mr. Farrell relative to this item? Seeing none, Mr. Farrell, thank you. If you could just stay up there, we're going to go into the next agenda item, please.
Veterans Council, David Farrell, Director.
I have no statement. This line covers the two parades for the most part, the Veterans Day Parade and Memorial Day Parade.
Any questions? Councilor Rodriguez.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Farrell, how are you?
How are you, Councilor?
Just a couple questions. One, do you have enough in funding in terms of providing stipends or whatever we do with the number of bands and organizations that participate on the parades that we will hold here in the city? Because I know that was a problem several years ago when I was still here, and we were running out of monies to pay for or to compensate for the expenses that some of the bands require?
Well, yes, I don't really have enough money to pay private bands to.
But I know you pay for sometimes some buses or something to bring the.
Yes, we pay the school department for student to transport the band to and from the high school to here.
Do you have enough?
Yes,
I mean,
yes, we do.
sufficient to cover those both parades?
Yes, sir. Yeah.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, I know that we do have the War Memorial on the third day of the budgets, but if I could just ask Mr. Farrell a question relative to the War Memorial, because I noticed that in the War Memorial budget, there was a line item there for future projects or capital projects that's on the budget, but it was basically not funded. Do you have any idea what that project was for? With the
Any
capital
objection
project?
from the council? Seeing none.
Yeah, just
Mr. Farrell,
if he knows.
may answer this if you choose to, but it's really under Mr. Kassiri's purview, but.
I mean, it had not, what I'm trying to get to, Mr. Chairman, is that if it had anything to do with the veterans or some sort of an improvement within the War Memorial for the veterans, or was it just something to do with the building itself?
Well, I'm sure we'll benefit from it if it's an improvement to the building. We're the only full-time occupant of the building, so we would certainly benefit by any upgrade or capital improvement to it. But I'm not privy to what it is, no.
What it was for, so you have no idea what it was for?
No, sir.
All right, thank you. Thank you,
You're
Mr.
Thank you, Counselor. Any other questions? Mr. Farrell, as the chair, I just had a quick question relative to the Veterans Work-Off Volunteer Program that we implemented as an ordinance. And I know last year when I asked you this, Mr. Farrell, there wasn't a lot of veterans that have participated. Have you seen any increased participation or anything relative to an update on that?
We're seeing limited, maybe 2 to 3 veterans have expressed an interest in doing it. It's a pretty involved process in terms of, because every year you have to submit pretty much the same paperwork.
Right.
And then you have to deal with a couple of the city departments to get it, to be, kosher, to meet state standards. So that's inhibiting in terms of, elderly veterans who, want to volunteer their time. And I've had 2 veterans who really don't want to do it again because they didn't feel it was worth the effort.
Okay.
Sorry. But,
Okay. So
but it's still, still being utilized. Yeah.
Okay, well, that's a good thing. All right. Any other questions? Thank you, Mr. Farrell. Have a good evening.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Madam
Councilors.
Clerk, if we could go on to the next agenda item, please.
Animal Control, Thomas DeChilla, Supervisor.
Good evening, Mr. DeChellis. How are you?
Good evening, councilors. I'm doing well.
Do you have a statement, or?
I do have a brief statement, if I could.
Absolutely.
I'd just like to give a brief department overview. The Animal Control Department is a 24-hour, 7-day-a-week operation. Regular business hours are from 7 a.m. to 11 p.m. After hours, there is 1 animal control officer assigned on call for emergencies. Currently, there are 8 employees, a director, 6 animal control officers, and 1 kennel worker. The clerical position remains unfunded and vacant. Animal control personnel are responsible to maintain the office grounds and kennel facility. In addition to responding to calls for service, which average around 8,000 per year, we also must perform all clerical and record-keeping functions as well as caring for the impounded animals. Animals that are not claimed and deemed adoptable are either adopted out, transferred to a humane society or rescue organization. Prior to adoption, all animals must undergo a behavioral assessment. This procedure is performed by animal control staff. Animal control annually impounds an average of 350 animals, primarily dogs. 3 years ago, the department started and maintains its own Facebook page. The use of social media has enabled the department to better serve our community. The public can find information ranging from found, missing, and adoptable animals to educational material, community services, and events. During the fiscal year 2017 budget cycle, as a result of contract negotiations, the department hired 2 animal control officers. The addition of these 2 positions enabled the department to add another officer to the night shift, thereby allowing us to increase our hours of operation. This, along with the hiring of a kennel worker in February 2016, enabled the department to deal with all operational functions in a timely, efficient manner. The Animal Control Department, within the last year and a half, has almost returned to the same staffing levels it had prior to the numerous layoffs the city sustained in the early 1990s. During my 23-year tenure as a Brockton Animal Control Officer, with the last 16 managing the department, I have witnessed a significant increase in the workload. Gone are the days of the dog catcher rounding up just stray dogs. Animal control now deals with both domestic and wildlife issues. In today's profession, the animal control officer is required to attend mandated training, be knowledgeable of applicable laws, proficient in animal handling techniques, and standards for proper animal care. Equally important is the ability to effectively and tactfully communicate with the community, properly document and record investigations and report writing. Most situations are resolved through education and follow-up investigations, while some situations result in fines being issued and criminal charges being filed. In closing, if the council finds it necessary to make cuts to the department budget, Animal Control will continue to provide the best possible service with the resources available. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. DeCellis. Any questions? Chair has a question. Mr. DeCellis, several years ago, it might have been Mayor Harrington's last budget or Mayor Belzotti's first budget, I brought forward to you, and the council at that time supported it, the fact that constituents were telling me that you didn't have a washer and dryer that was operational at the animal control, that you would be using rags on the dogs and cats, and you'd have to throw them out. Subsequently, that budget, you're able to acquire it. It has to be past its lifetime. Could you just give us an update, because it's really important to be able to keep that going, sanitary and also just for...
That's correct. Actually, the original washer is no longer working. We upgraded that about a year ago.
Okay.
The dryer is actually still working. However, we really could use a brand-new facility.
You got to take baby steps,
Well, I just figured I'd throw it out there.
It was good. You're okay on that endeavor right now?
Yes, we are.
Okay. Any other questions? Mr. DeCellis, thank you for what you do.
Thank you very much.
We're going to go on to the next agenda item, and once you read it, we're going to go to Mr. Council Cruz, please.
Elections Commission, John McGeary, Executive Director.
Council Cruz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to my colleagues, Mr. McGeary called me last night. I don't know if you know, but he's had some pretty major surgery and he's laid up. He did want me to let you know that if you have any specific questions, you can call him at home. But everything in his budget is statutory, and there's really not much we can do about it anyways, because it is an election year. And but if he had specific questions, he'd be happy to entertain them at home. And I do hope he's feeling better, but he has had some major surgery, so he couldn't be here.
We wish you a speedy recovery. Thank
Correct.
you, Council Cruz. And again, Council, if you have any questions, John is always accessible, so please don't hesitate. We're going to go on to the next agenda item, please.
Board of Health, Louis Tatalia Jr., Executive Director.
Good evening, Mr. Tattaglia. Good evening, Council. Good to see you. Do you have a statement, Lou, or?
No, just basically what you have in front of you is a level-funded budget.
Any questions, councilors? Mr. Tattaglia came all the way down here, councilors. Not one question?
Give me a minute to get there, will you?
Wait a minute, give us a minute to get
Council
here.
Barnes.
I did, I had one actually. I'm just kind of juggling these two books, it's getting difficult. The anthrax reporting, are we in jeopardy of anthrax?
Yeah. Well, I'll put it this way, we have a training next, in July with the biohazardous detection system that is up at the post office.
Oh, okay, I guess I thought,
That could go off at any time.
okay, so in that, other kind of chemical, I guess, disasters or situations will be covered in that as well. I guess I was just kind of wondering, just with this specific,
Well, we cover anything. I mean, now it's, you never know what it's going to be. So our training is in all types of emergency situations.
Okay.
But we still have the biohazardous detection system up at the post office on Manley Street, is it? Yep.
oh, okay. Oh, the distribution center.
Yeah.
Okay. And so now with the public health nurse, I mean, there have been several, I know we just approved that last week or Tuesday.
Last night, Councilor.
Was it just last night?
Last night, the $8,000 last night.
Feels like a lifetime. Okay. So with this person in the training and all of these things that are going to be happening, we've, just around the state of Massachusetts, there have been outbreaks of, like rubella and mumps and measles, whooping cough, all these things that are kind of re-emerging, I guess, that we thought we eradicated. So will that person also, I guess, do some sort of PSAs or public trainings or something to keep our community, I guess, up to date and aware, and how to avoid that in the schools, things like that?
Well, yes, but what the main thing is, we've got to, or the city has got to get children inoculated before they come to school. And that leaves a gap.
I thought you couldn't go to school unless you had your vaccines. I thought that was like a thing.
I'm not in charge of that.
Okay, I'll ask them Friday. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Tartaglia. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Council Cruz.
Thank you. It took a minute to get to that, Mr. Chairman, that's all. What are you doing? You have vacant funded ordinance enforcement officer.
Yeah.
Yes.
So if we approve this budget, that position is funded and you will be filling it?
Yes, and why I didn't fill it in February, when the other person who was there went to a sanitary inspector position. At that time, the mayor did not know, what the budget was going to be. So he told me to hold off and let's see what happens.
So right now, we have one ordinance enforcement officer, and there are positions for two.
I definitely need two, definitely.
There's no question about that. And if you can give a brief explanation more for the public, what our ordinance enforcement officers are charged with?
Well, it's all the outsides of properties. It's the junk cars, the dumpsters, the vacant, abandoned buildings, as far as getting them cleaned up outside. There's 2 or 3 other ordinances that they do also. The nuisance ordinance is the largest one that we use, because that will cover a lot of things.
So those calls that we get a lot, the homeowner can call, or the resident can call the Board of Health and register that complaint directly.
Right, or they can go on to See-Click Fix and register it on the computer.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Council. Any other questions for Mr. Tartaglia? Seeing none, have a good evening.
Thank you, you
Thank you
too.
for being here. Thank you. Madam Clerk, if we could go on to number 11, please.
Assessor John O'Donnell, Chairman.
Can just say fix it.
Mr. O'Donnell, good evening. Good evening, Council. Thanks for being here. Any opening statement?
No opening statement.
Any questions? Council Farwell.
Yeah, just an informational question, John. Obviously, if we go to a full 2.5 levy, that's going to affect property taxes for the next fiscal year. Have you modeled yet what that might do to the average homeowner, or?
That won't be till like October,
October?
till our values are certified by the state.
All right, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Any other questions for Mr. O'Donnell? At least we got one question for you, Mr. O'Donnell. Have a good evening. Thank you for being here. If we could go on to number 12, please.
Treasurer Collector Martin Brophy, Treasurer.
Mr. Brophy, how are you?
Very good.
Thanks for
Good
being
evening,
here.
councilors.
For the statement?
I just would like to actually thank my staff. As you know, every dollar of this budget comes through my 2 offices. This past year, we had 2 retirements, which put a little more pressure on the staff, and I think they did a great job handling this past fiscal year.
You tell your brother we have his baseball hat still in the back room there, if you could just tell him that, you know?
Getting moldy, too.
It is.
You might see him more than I do, so.
Any questions for the treasurer? Council Cruz.
Thank you. As I look at your personal services, there's quite a few positions that are vacant, unfunded.
Correct.
How badly do you need those to serve the public?
Those have been eliminated. There were 1 in 2005, 1 in 2003, I think, in 2009. We've survived. My minimum staffing is the 12 clerks that I have now, myself and my assistant.
Now, do they show up because they're union positions, or?
They've been in just the budget itself. Some of them are union positions, they're all union positions. If the day ever comes we can fund them, I certainly will add them back in.
Add them back in. Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Council Cruz. Any other questions for Mr. Brophy? Seeing none, we're going to move on to the next agenda item. Mr. Brophy, if you could stay there, please.
Treasurer's Debt Service, Martin Brophy, Treasurer.
Any questions for Mr. Brophy relative to this agenda item? Council Cruz?
This seems like a place we always find a little bit. Is there anything you can't carry?
This year, I'm not sure. We've actually got, next week, we're doing next week and a half, we're doing a ban, which is a temporary borrowing, and it's for a little more than actually what I had budgeted for. It's going to be for almost $11.8 million. As you know, interest rates have been fluctuating. I budgeted actually fairly conservatively at 2.5 interest rate, based on speaking with our financial advisors. If that comes in a little higher, I'm going to need just 2.5 on the 11 million, would be, I believe it was about $500,000 or about $400,000. So if it comes in a little higher, I'm going to be close.
And this is, treasurer's debt is where we carry any of the bonds that we have outstanding, correct?
Correct. This is strictly general debt. The water and sewer have their own debt budgets and pay for their own debt.
Pay their own debt, but we generally do them as general obligation bonds, correct?
Well, a lot of the water sewer can actually go through the state revolving fund, so you get a 2% automatic interest. You can do an interim loan. It is general obligation debt, but it is, an easier one to calculate out.
And so that debt wouldn't show here?
No.
And a lot of the debt we carry still is to do with redoing the sewer treatment plant, correct?
Correct. We borrowed over $100 million on the sewer treatment plant.
And in a general sense, and this might be something more for Mr. Cronin anyways, we have a limit that we can borrow, correct?
There's a debt limit. It is 5% of the state equalized valuation.
And what's the state equalized valuation?
6.8 billion. 6.8 billion. 6.8 billion.
Is the state equalized debt number?
Yes.
And what'd you say it is, what percent?
5%. However, since water and sewer are enterprise funds, those are considered outside the debt limit. So those aren't included in your real inside the debt limit. We have a borrowing capacity that is very high right now.
You just can't pay for it.
Yeah.
So our capacity...
Well, you have to pay for it.
Yeah, our capacity is high, but
you have to pay for it.
We generally, do we pretty much run at the top of what we want, and again, probably what we'd want to, even though theoretically we could.
We have the ability to borrow a lot more than our revenues.
We don't have the
allow us
ability to pay for it.
Yeah, so if we had a higher revenue base, the city, and I think there's a lot of capital need that could be financed through borrowing.
Right.
If you had a higher revenue base so that you could pay the debt service on it, you could take care of some problems that aren't. But the problem is, how do we pay for it? And in the present budget, you're already up against the 2.5 limit. Nobody likes to hear it, but the only way to get above that for those kinds of projects is to ask the voters.
And certainly, and again, I'm not looking to get into a discussion of this right now, but when we get into later this summer, the discussion about the water treatment plant, that's be a huge bonding issue, right?
Yeah, it would be paid, if we did it would be paid for by a borrowing. It would not be a borrowing which would put us close to exceeding our debt limit, and it would be paid for within the water enterprise budget. In my view, is it's probably a little bit cheaper than the current cost. To borrow the money and run it is probably cheaper than to have the contract with the fixed cost and pay for the use of water.
Okay, but that's how we would do that, is the bond. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Council, any other questions relative to this agenda item? Thank you, Mr. Brophy. Madam Clerk, if we could go on to 14, please.
Parking Authority, Robert Malley, Executive Director.
Good evening, Mr. Malley, how are you?
Good evening, how are you?
Good, thanks for being here. Do you have an opening?
No, not really. Just a brief comment. As I'm sure you all know, our budget does not come out of the general fund, but is funded from our reserves. It's basically level funded this year, with a couple of exceptions. The line for building lease is $9,000 higher than it was than we spent last year, because we have leased another property. as of July 1st. And the line that says telephone probably needs a little explanation. It's $2,500. What that pays for is the internet connections to the cameras we've installed in the parking lots. We are expecting a retirement this year. That's why we have separation costs in there. And under goods and supplies, the tools and hardware has been increased because we anticipate buying a sander to do parking lots in the winter, which will save us some money on our snow plowing contract. Aside from that, I'll take any questions.
Any questions for Mr. Malley? Chair has a question. Mr. Malley, could you just explain to me the line item, what the definition of consultant is? It's 10 grand requested, 10 grand recommended, but what's a consultant do?
The consultant will be to help with implementation of the parking study recommendations, specifically a pay-by-cell phone option on parking meters, right, and some help with the technology as far as what we want to buy for smart meters out there and the credit card, taking credit cards.
Yep. Okay.
I think we need an expert for that, and it isn't me.
It's not us either. Any other questions for Mr. Malley?
Actually, I have a question.
Council Cruz.
So your overall budget is, and I know it's low, 698, is that correct?
Yes.
How much have we brought in this fiscal year, do you know? Or a typical fiscal year? Sorry to put you on the spot on that,
I think projected for this fiscal year, it will be just about $800,000.
So, and how much is in your fund?
In the reserve funds?
Yes.
Right now, $1.1 million.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Council. Any other questions for Mr. Malley? Seeing none, thank you, Mr. Malley. Have a good evening.
Thank you.
Madam Clerk, number 15, which is your last agenda item for tonight's scheduled agenda.
Planner, Rob May, Director.
Mr. May, good evening.
Good evening, sir.
Any opening or?
I just wanted to say we've had a very successful year this year. We have and almost finished the blueprint for Brockton, which is our new citywide comprehensive plan that's on our website for download, and we have hard copies at the libraries and a couple other places. We are also about to publish our urban agriculture plan, and we began some work this year on a Campello framework plan. Next year, we hope to finish the Campello framework plan. We also want to do some planning on the east side around the Quincy Crescent, Quincy Center, Center Street corridors. There's some interesting development opportunities over there to really create a stronger neighborhood. We're also working on the municipal facilities plan, and we will be bringing that to the school committee later this month. They'll be discussing the school facilities, and we're also working, of course, on the city facilities throughout the city, looking at the condition that they're in, determining what activities can be done as quick fixes, what need long-term activities, and then how do we prioritize those investments. We also became a Green Communities, Massachusetts Green Community, and passed the Complete Streets Ordinance. Next year, we'll also be working with the Health Department on creating urban ag regulations, especially around the keeping of animals. So with that, I will
Thank you, Mr. May.
take questions.
Any questions for Mr. May? Council Cruz.
Thank you. Under plan of purchase of services, consultant, $65,000. What consultant services mostly does that go towards?
And Councilor, if I may, as President Sullivan said earlier, this is the revised budget sheet that was passed out by JCON, and you do have a copy of that. That is correct. The consulting services that we purchase through the planning department are professional planners and other organizations that help us in preparing materials for either the citywide comprehensive plan or area district plans. We also help prepare, consulting is helping us develop marketing materials, promotional activities. Those are all consulting activities.
Okay. And under planning urban self-help match, MGL 40Q differential, diff rather, $200,000, but we get money that comes in out of that, correct?
Excuse me. The collector's office, as the total amount of diff money comes into the city, segregates that into a separate account. Each year I come before you and ask for an allocation out of that account. Last year we started, our initial program was $230,000. This year we're asking for a little bit less. We know that we need to take some of that money and spread it out throughout the rest of the city. The total amount of diff revenue that's being generated, I don't have that number. I can get that for you, working with, oh, Marty's gone.
No emergency on that, but if you could send us an email, just like to know how much is coming in.
I'd be happy to.
Because this isn't revenues, obviously, in this book, but I'd like to know how much is coming in when we approve how much is going out.
How much is going out?
Appreciate that, and I had one more. I guess that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Council Cruz. Any other councils? Council Rodriguez.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Mayor, quick question. I don't know if you were here when I was asking the mayor the reasons for the reductions or increases in the department. And you were one of these departments that actually had requested $782,000, and his recommendation was about 100 and plus less than what you had requested.
Yeah, we did take a hit on.
Is it on the 40R and
on some projects? We had initially thought that we had more 40R dollars. We did not have that. Working with the treasurers, or working with the CFO, we realized that was a lower number, so that's where the $85,000 was eliminated from. And we're budgeting less diff dollars this year, and there's some changes in the purchase of services. There's a couple of cuts in that budget also.
Okay. And also, are there any news in terms of the two-way traffic in downtown?
MassDOT has been working very closely with us and the U.S. Department of Transportation. We believe that we have an agreement that we can use some funds that MassDOT had set aside to allow us to do a transportation study of downtown.
Study again?
Well, we have to get this computer model set up to see how the traffic is going to move. It's going to be a very expensive process to convert to two-way traffic because there's at least 12 intersections that all need brand-new traffic lights. And so there is data that MassDOT and US DOT want from us that includes, the volume of traffic, projected volumes on different roadways in different configurations. If Main Street goes two-way, but Warren stays one-way, if Montello is one-way instead of two-way, all of these things have to be calculated out electronically. And so we thought that we were going to be able to advance that a lot quicker, but US DOT is dragging their feet just a little bit, but we think that we're going to be able to advance that soon. It is a high priority. We know that we want to get into that as quickly as possible, but with the limited funding that we have, and we're kind of borrowing and begging and borrowing, I don't want to say stealing, from other state sources, we really need US DOT's blessing on that.
Is there a possibility that we can, again, we've discussed this so many times, and it's one of these things that I'm afraid that this thing isn't going to be done in my lifetime. The way things are going, it probably won't even be done in my children's lifetime.
You look pretty healthy.
I know, but the way, it doesn't look good. I'm just saying that, is there a possibility that we can pressure,
complex,
that we can just pressure, the stakeholders to basically, even instead of taking the entire project all at once, to attempt just the return? I mean, how can a section of the road that used to be two-way, it used to be two ways, be so difficult? I mean, this is bigger than the Big Dig, just to return it to two-way traffic.
It used to be two ways, and it was, when it was
cars were bigger
designed as
back then.
two-way 100 years ago, as we then flip back to two-way traffic from the one-way traffic, we have to use the existing the new and updated regulations for roadway construction and intersection movements. It's above my knowledge at times of understanding how intersections work properly, but there's geometry. Some of the intersections may need to be completely rebuilt. All of the equipment needs to be reinstalled. None of these traffic signals downtown talk to each other. It's based on a timer system, so even if nobody's coming, you're going to get a red light, and it's going to wait, and it's going to click down a certain number of times, and then it flips back to green. We're working very closely with OCPC and with MassDOT to move this forward.
Because I'm telling you, I can't imagine, I mean, these resources and energy that we're spending in the downtown redevelopment, these meetings and these plans that we're putting into play, unless we do something with traffic in the downtown area, I think, to be honest with you, I think we're wasting our time. Because when you've got a highway in the middle of your city, nobody is going to pull over and stop to do window shopping at anything that you're building in the downtown area. So I'm not saying that you need to return it to two-way traffic, but we need to do something with the traffic patterns that we have, because all you got to do is stand in front of the courthouse around 5 o'clock in the afternoon, and you see what goes on in the middle of the city. And that's why, in my honest opinion, we've tried everything to bring life back into this downtown, except to do something to create controlled chaos. And I think, as far as traffic is concerned, I think it would make sense to have controlled chaos. So I think it's up to us to basically pressure whomever we want to. I mean, I can understand some of these stakeholders out there. It makes them look good every time we have another study to do. And every time we have another study, they hold these little forums, then they have these group meetings or whatever, but it's not really doing much in terms of what we need to happen in the middle of the city. And until we do something about the highway that we have in the middle of Brockton for about a quarter of a mile, I think we're wasting our time. I mean, we were at planning yesterday. There's a beautiful structure that we're looking to place at 121 Main, and it's almost a shame or a waste of a project to put that right next to a highway, because if you look at traffic, it looks like you're going through a highway when you're going through Main Street. You know, so please convey that to whoever you need to convey that to. I understand that studies need to be done, but I think we've had, since I've been involved in city government, we've had about 3 or 4 studies done of downtown. And as we do the studies, it expires, and we have to do another one, and we have to do another one. And yet, somehow it makes you feel that if you go to Home Depot, buy a couple gallons of yellow paint a couple stripes in the middle, turn the lights around, and you're done. I mean, to me, it doesn't seem like it's one of those things, but for some odd reason, it seems to be.
I don't want to be there on that day.
I'm telling you, I'm actually thinking of, getting a couple of my buddies down on Main Street. Council Sullivan, are you, want to try this out?
I'll help you.
All right. Thank you, Mr. May. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Counsel. Counsel Barnes, followed by Counsel Farwell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a message to my colleagues who want to get out there in DYI. There was a counselor, I think, in Salem that actually did that, and he's now in jail. So
that's good.
I would advise against that. But to go back to the budget, I was just actually kind of looking as you were having the discussion with Councilor Rodriguez, and on the stipend line item in planner personnel non-OT, they were all zeros until the mayor recommended $600 and something. And then when I looked at your personnel structure, there's something on here for hazard pay for $600 and something. What is that?
That has to do with the new contract that's been signed. That's all union collective bargaining. And I would defer to Jay on how the contract was.
new hazards have arisen? Because like I said, it had never been in here before. But I
It's
guess
the
I'm,
union contract.
okay, well. And if it's such a hazard, wouldn't it be more than $600?
So we settled in the last year with the Brockton engineers, technicians, and inspectors. The junior planner is in that union, and that's the benefit that was bargained for the union, and so he gets it. It goes back, the contract was unsettled since, I think, 2012 or something, so it was a fairly back.
Okay.
Okay, it's contractual for that union position.
Okay, and this actually might be that too. So, again, kind of to piggyback or to follow up on what Councilor Rodriguez said earlier about some of the department requests and the mayor's recommendations. So for clothing allowance, was that something new? Because it jumped from your request
Same thing. When
of $800 to
when we settled the
$2,400.
contract, that was subsequent to the preparation of the budget by the department head. And so all of the changes that were the result of the settlement of the contract had to be reflected by addition by the mayor. In addition, the contract was budgeted at the last settled dollar amount, which I think was, I don't remember for sure, 2012 or 13. That union went a long time before it got settled.
Mhm.
So there's a good-sized bump because of that, because all of that gets pushed into this contract.
Wow, okay. Okay, all righty. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you, Mr.
Thank you,
Chairman.
Counselor. Counselor Farwell.
Yep, just two quick things to follow up on what Mr. Condon said. Maybe next year, footnote some of this stuff, and it'll save us from asking all these questions, because, you know, I hear you. Right, they're settled, except for the ones coming up. Two quick things from Mr. May with respect to consultants and the blueprint for Brockton. Maybe we're doing it, but I do hope that as we advance the issue of housing, and you and I have had somewhat of a discussion over time about an over-reliance on smart growth overlay districts and housing, I think it's so important to at least evaluate what are the potential revenues versus what are the services that will have to be provided, and in particular the schools. Because if we go into an area where we put a significant housing project in, that could skew the available classroom space, the teachers that are required, might even cause some busing costs. So I hope that if we aren't doing that, we will, that we'll include the school department in some type of an evaluation of, if we put this smart growth district in, or we put this housing project in here, what effect will that have on you? And it'll have a ripple effect on police and fire and other services. And the last thing is, I do like the fact that you have open forums. The only thing is, you don't really know if people are from Brockton. And you had one open forum where someone called me, and it just jogged my memory tonight. There were a couple of people from out of town, and they're real estate people, and they were pushing, well, we need a zoning change to allow in-law apartments in buildings and et cetera, and they weren't even from Brockton. So I guess as a suggestion, and they even do this at town meetings in towns, perhaps the residents could sit in one area, and you could have visitors and interested persons sit in another. Because otherwise, you have no idea who's giving you recommendations and who isn't. And I think that's important, to allow our residents to have first shot at getting up and asking questions and making comments. So other than that, for a small staff, I think you do a great job.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Counselor. Any other questions? I know Counselor Cruz had a follow-up.
All set, thank you. Just a quick question. I see in-state travel, $1,250. I don't see any out-of-state travel. I know that you've gone to some conferences.
Yes.
You're a great Facebooker. So I know almost as much as Councilor Monahan, but, so I know that you've gone to those. Where?
The Three Stooges.
Where would that money be?
I eat that.
You're personally paying for those?
I pay for those. Yeah, the city might pay registration, but I pay for my own hotel and transportation.
Okay, well, thank you for that then. I'm glad I asked it then, so the people at home know that every city employee isn't, there's many city employees who do things like that, but thank you.
If you'd like to create an out-of-state travel.
Sorry, we can't do that. We can only cut the budget, we can't add. Thank you, that's what I was looking for, thank you.
Any other questions for Mr. May? Seeing none, thank you, Mr. May.
Thank you, sir.
Councilors, we've done really great tonight. That being said, if we could, and nobody objects, of course, Mel and Ann Maria here, the auditor and assistant auditor. So if no one objects, let's take from Friday night, its agenda. Why don't we take 14, 15, 16, and 17 while they're here? That's
We'd rather stay late Friday night.
Yeah, I'm sure we would. I object. Yeah. Thank you, Mel. Thanks for pinch hitting tonight. Any opening or anything like that?
I just want to say that it's been a little over 9 months that I've been city auditor, and it's been just a blessing. And I want to say thank you to my staff. It's been wonderful. Thank you. That's it.
Yeah, you have a great staff, and I mean, we're very fortunate to have both you and Anne Marie and Connie and the like. So thank you, councilors. Relative to 14 auditor, any questions relative to that? None? Madam Clerk, do you mind reading? I don't know, my glass is really too good. Could you 15, please, Friday night?
Auditor mailroom. Mary Lynn Peters, 2.
Councilors, any questions relative to this agenda item?
Maybe just a brief explanation for the people at home, what the difference is. A lot of the mailroom, which is not
In terms
much.
of separating it, well, the mailroom is what we use here for the entire city hall for different mailings, postings. The personnel department, which sends out all those benefit informations and whatnot, they go through us, through the mailroom. So that's where.
Thank you.
Any questions on this? Thank you for that clarification. Seeing none, we're going to move on to the next one, please, Madam Clerk.
Auditor telephone, Mary Lynn Peters, 2, city auditor.
Any questions on telephone? None? Go on to the next agenda item, please, Madam Clerk.
Retirement, non-contributory, Mary Lynn Peters, 2, city auditor.
Councilors, any questions on this one? None? Councilor Cruz.
Just a brief explanation, because a couple of these are oddball items that the public asks about. If you could basically.
Non-contrib, sure. There's only one individual left still on it, and that person basically, the city pays for their pension costs, so.
So these are people who had retired back before there were, the pension system was set up the way it is?
Yes.
And there's only one person left?
Only one person left.
I shouldn't ask how old, should I?
I know, no, I don't know the answer.
Okay, but I wanted the public to know that. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Councilors, any other questions on that? Seeing none, councilors, thank you, Mel. Thank you very much. Councilors, I typically like to have Mr. Conan go last, so even though he's here, out of respect for him, if you don't take it the wrong way, Jay, I'd like to have you Friday. I think it's a good summary to have him conclude it, if nobody objects on that. And councilors, I want to thank you. We were very professional tonight. We were very timely. And again, we do have the new books, so going forward, to continue doing your research and use the new books. We're going to be here tomorrow night, 6:30, councilors. Councilor Cruz?
Actually, I do have one question for Mr. Condon, if we could. I know he has a new team, and I don't know either one of them. If he could.
Mr. Cruz just had a quick question for you.
I said, I know you have a new team, and I don't know either one of them. I thought maybe you could introduce them so we know who.
That was I neglected that. I also want to take a shot at the councilor from Ward 6. One of the reasons that your books were changed was Councilor Lally made a special request after all the budget was done. He'd asked me earlier, and I forgot. It didn't get into the budget. He wanted more money in postage. We got more money in postage, and we had to change your books. I told you there's one place was inconsequential. That was one of them. I didn't even get any thanks. My guys worked hard on that.
My thanks is letting you out earlier before it's done, yeah.
Yes. So one of the difficulties in this budget was basically the environment we were constructing it, but also we had 2 new staff members. They did a terrific job, but Andrew Nokon only came on in the middle of March, and Jackie Alves came on a week later toward the end of March. And all of this work had to be done by people who had never done any of it before. They're very bright, and they're very familiar with computer technology, but they were not familiar with Munis, and not that familiar with municipal budgeting. So we had a couple slip-ups, mostly because I wasn't communicating what I thought I was communicating, and they did a great job, and I really want to say thank you to them, because we were late getting it in, mainly not because of their work, but because of the circumstances we're facing. I didn't even finish with the mayor until Wednesday of last week, and you got your budget books Tuesday night, so largely because they worked hard at it. So thank you, folks. Jackie Alves and Andrew Nokon.
Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Cruz, anything, Councilor Lally?
While it was brought up, I do want to thank you for putting that in. That'll allow us as a city council to continue to make current private ways into public ways. They pay the same taxes and fees as everyone else. They deserve to be eligible to have their
The
road.
council did make a specific request way back when. I'm getting old, you got to write it down with me, it doesn't stick up there anymore. I forgot about it, didn't get in. And then he mentioned it to me as, oh man, we didn't do it, so, but it's in there now, and I think it's for good reason, so.
Thank you. Councilors, I just want to take a personal moment of privilege. I want to thank all of you, first of all, for being very, very studied on this. It's obvious you guys have done your research and done your due diligence, so thank you for that. On a personal note, I want to wish my father, Robert E. Sullivan, a happy birthday. Thanks, Dad. Meeting's adjourned.